aelodau yn y siambr a'r eraill yn ymuno drwy gyswllt fideo. Bydd yr holl aelodau sy'n cymryd rhan yn rhyfodion y Senedd, le bynnag y bont yn cael eu trin yn gyfartal. Mae cyfarfod llawn y gynhelir drwy gynadledd fideo yn unol ar rheolau sefydlog Senedd Cymru yn gyfystyr y thrafodion y Senedd at ddibenion deddf Llywodraeth Cymru 2006. Bydd rhai o ddarpariaethau rheol sefydlog 34 yn gymwys ar gyfer cyfarfod llawn heddi, a mae'r rheini wedi nodi ar eich agenda chi. Dwi eisiau atgoffa'r aelodau bod y rheolau sefydlog sy'n ymwneud â threfn yn y cyfarfod llawn yn berthnasol i'r cyfarfod yma, ac yr un mor berthnasol i aelodau yn y siambr a'r rhai sydd yn ymuno drwy gyswllt fideo. Dyma ni felly'n cyrraedd yr eitem gyntaf, sef y cwestiynau'r Prif Weinidog, ac mae'r cwestiwn cyntaf gan Rhun ap Iorwerth.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Llywydd. Wnaeth y Prif Weinidog ddatganiad am argeuledd tai yn y farchnad leol yn Ynys Môn.
Llywydd, diolch yn fawr. Mae pwysau sylweddol o ran nifer y tai sydd ar gael yn Ynys Môn. Yn ogystal â'r camau sydd ar waith yn barod, cymorth i brynu swyddogion galluogi tai gwledig ar gronfa safleoedd segur, enghraifft, byddwn ni'n cyflwyno cynigion newydd i helpu bobl o cymunedau lleol i cael tai gan cynnwys cymunedau yn Ynys Môn.
Diolch yn fawr i chi, a gai eich llongyfarch ar eich ail ethol yn Brif Weinidog, a dwi'n meddwl i bod hi'n briodol iawn bod y cwestiwn cyntaf yn y tymor seneddol newydd yma'n ymwneud â mater sy'n gymaint o argyfwng, ac yn un mae pobl yn mynnu y gweld gweithredu arno fo. Un cyfraniad cwbl amlwg at yr argyfwng tai ydy'r twf cwbl ddi-reolaeth yn y farchnad am ail gartrefi. Dwi'n ei weld o bob dydd. Dwi'n ei weld o'n ym Mhentre'n Llŷn, dwi'n ei weld o mewn pentrefi Glanmôr yn enwedig. Dwi'n ei weld o yn strydoedd gwag a ffenestri tywyll y Gaea yn rhwystredigaeth pobl ifanc yn methu fforddio cael cartre'n eu cymuned. Dwi'n ei weld o'n y cynnydd o 16% mewn pris eiddo ar Ynys Môn yn y flwyddyn diwethaf. Mae pethau'n mynd yn waith bob dydd. A gai wahaniaethu'n glir rhwng perchnogaeth ail gartrefi a thwristiaeth. Mae twristiaeth gynhenid wedi berchnogi'n lleol yn arf economaidd pwysig, ond i berchnogaeth ail gartrefi di-reolaeth yn helpu dim. Oes mae angen gwell swyddi efo cyflogau uwch. Oes mae eisiau adeiladu llawer mwy o dai gwirioneddol fforddiadwy i'w prynu a'i rhentu, ond mae'n rhaid i'ch llywodraeth chi yn y Senedd yma weithredu ar y frys sy'n defnyddio pob arf cynllunio a threthiant ag ati i geisio dod â rhyw fath o reolaeth ar y farchnad dai ac i roi rhyw fath o obaith, rhyw fath o siawns i bobl yn cymunedau ni. Dwi ag eraill i gofyn am weithredu ers blynyddoedd, gai ofyn i chi reit ar ddechrau y tymor yma i roi ymrwymiad llwyr a chlir neu mi fydd hi yn rhy hwyr.
Llywydd, diolch fawr i Rhun ap Iorwerth am y cwestiwn na. Bydd yr aelod yn gwybod bod hwn ail cartrefi yn fater ydw i wedi cynnig gweithio'n drosbleidiol arno'n benodol. Ysgrifennais at Arweinydd Plaid Cymru yn wythnos diwethaf yn cadarnhau bod y Llywodraeth yn barod i ystyried nifer o faterion yn y ffordd honno. Dwi'n edrych ymlaen at y sgwrs ni'n mynd i gael cyn diwedd a prynhawn. Rydw i wedi gweld cynllun 5 pwynt Plaid Cymru, a dwi'n siŵr mai syniadau yn y cynllun yna ni'n gallu gweithio arno dy gilydd. Dwi'n cytuno gyda beth wedodd Rhun ap Iorwerth. Mae'n rhaid i ni defnyddio nifer o'r pethau sydd da ni yn y maes trethi, yn y maes cynllunio a rai pethau eraill, tynnu nhw dy gilydd i trial i wneud wahaniaeth yn y sefyllfa mae wedi esbonio prynhawn yma, ac i wneud os allwn ni trwy cydweithio dy gilydd.
Sam Rowlands.
Diolch, Llywydd, and thank you, First Minister, for your responses so far to the important points raised by Rhun. Certainly, there are some pressures being added to the housing market due to second home ownership. But perhaps there's a risk of being seen to be fiddling while Rome's burning if that becomes the primary focus in a way to support this important area of work. Surely the most important thing to support this would actually to see more homes being built. So, for example, your own government's assessment of need in North Wales says that 1,600 homes should be built every year. for the next 20 years. At the moment, that pace is only 1,200 homes a year. So clearly there's an issue there in the environment for investment to see homes being built. So what will you be looking to do to improve that environment, to see more investment, more homes to be built, and therefore more people having access to those properties?
Well, Llywydd, I don't disagree that there is a wider context within which Rhina Pioreth's question has to be regarded, but he was asking very specifically about those sets of circumstances where second home ownership risks driving out of those local communities people who are priced out of being able to buy properties because there are people from further afield who have deeper pockets that they are able to apply. So while there is a wider context, that wasn't the focus of the question put to me. The wider question about building more homes, this government is committed to building 20,000 low-carbon homes for social renting purposes. What we will not be doing, Llywydd, is we will not be tearing up the protections which the planning system offers to individuals and local communities, as is proposed by his party in England. Those are important protections, and we will want to see them continued here in Wales. So while we build more houses, which are necessary in the way that the Welsh Government's calculations have set out, we do it in a way that properly balances the needs for new housing against the protections which local communities properly have to make sure that their futures too can be safeguarded.
Carolyn Thomas.
Diolch, Llywydd. I know the housing situation is difficult for residents in Ynys Môn. It has been clear to me through emails that residents need more affordable housing. So on a similar vein, First Minister, I commend the Welsh Government for reaching its ambitious 20,000 affordable homes target. That was just last term, and committing to building a further 20,000 low-carbon homes this term. The Welsh Labour Government has also provided transformative funding for social houses to local authorities, such as Flintshire, where I am a member, and we are looking to build 500 affordable homes in Flintshire, allowing them to build affordable homes while creating jobs and apprenticeships for local people, so it's also creating jobs as well. Will the First Minister outline the plans that his new Welsh Labour Government has for home building through local authorities to help address housing shortages in these areas where people are struggling to afford a home? Thank you.
Well, Llywydd, can I congratulate the member on her election to the Chamber and on this her first contribution to our debates, and an important contribution it was too, because our ambition to build 20,000 homes for social renting depend upon a new capacity for our local authority colleagues to build housing for rent in those communities, where far too often those stocks have been diminished by policies promoted by other parties. And there are ambitious plans in a number of parts of Wales for local authorities to play their part. And this government will certainly, in funding, but also in the partnerships that we create through the WLGA and others, seek to maximise the contribution that local authorities in all parts of Wales can make to making sure that there are affordable homes for rent for those local populations, people who see their futures in those communities and want to know that they have housing that they can depend upon, that will be there for the long term and will allow them to play the part that they want to play in building futures for themselves and for their wider communities.
Cwestiwn 2, John Griffiths.
Diolch, Llywydd. What are the Welsh Government's immediate economic priorities for this Senedd term?
Llywydd, thank John Griffiths for that. Amongst our immediate priorities are the continuation of support for businesses while the coronavirus crisis persists, and the implementation of our young person's guarantee of an offer of work, education or training to everyone aged under 25 in Wales.
First Minister, our city and town centres are very important for economic activity and jobs, and very important in other ways as places for people to meet up, in terms of that sense of local pride and indeed sense of well-being. In Newport, as with other places across the UK, we face many challenges, from changes in retail shopping habits to online. Recently, Debenhams has closed, but there's much good work going on. A major revamp of Newport Market, a major new hotel, and much else besides. That good work, First Minister, is a result of strong partnership working between Newport City Council, Welsh Government, businesses and others. And it's seen much new residential development, service provision and leisure provision in the city centre. But of course, we face new challenges now with the pandemic and continuing retail change. So First Minister, I wonder if you could offer reassurance today that that strong, very strong partnership working between Welsh Government, Newport City Council and other partners will continue and sustain that, that change that we've already seen, and make sure that Newport City Centre is fit to meet the challenges of the future.
Well, Llywodraeth, I thank John Griffiths for that. He points to a genuine public policy challenge of our times. The future of retail on our high streets was already a challenging one before coronavirus, and that has undoubtedly added to the challenges that that sector faces. But John Griffiths is right, Llywydd, that what that means is that we have to reimagine the future, not try and recreate the past in the present. And that will mean a wider range of activities that will bring people into town and community and city centres, including residential use of those centres, a different form of retail and other activities as well. During the month of April, I was able to visit Newport City Centre with Mr Griffiths, and we met businesses there who had opened up during the pandemic and were demonstrating that it was still possible to make a success of those businesses using the investments that the Welsh Government and other local actors have put into recreating the city centre of Newport, whether that is the investment in the market, in the library, in the leisure centre, or in the Chartist Tower Hotel, to which John Griffiths referred. But it also involves the university as well, making sure that there is life in the centre of that city that will attract more people to it. And in answer to his underlying question, whether the partnership approach that we have taken to town centre redevelopment over the last 5 years will be continued in this term, then yes, certainly, that is the way that we will prioritise city and town regeneration, a partnership between Welsh Government, local authorities, businesses themselves and other major public sector partners who can make that difference and make sure that those centres have a life that will draw people to them in the future.
Joel James.
Thank you, Llywydd, and if I could just take this opportunity to congratulate you on your re-election and likewise the First Minister. First Minister, last year Treorchy High Street was named the best in the UK and was praised for its independent shops and community spirit. However, it is disappointing that success is not evenly spread across South Wales Central. Recently, Tonypandy and Porth were named in the top 20 most economically vulnerable towns in the UK. Sadly, the pandemic has only exacerbated these existing inequalities and highlighted the need for a bold, ambitious plan to help the High Street back on its feet and to deliver good local jobs for local people. Does the First Minister agree with me that to support high streets across Wales, we need to boost small businesses by establishing a business rate-free relief zone and reform business rates so it is no longer an outdated tax on growth? Thank you.
Well, thank the member for that question and for his generous opening to it. During the month of April, I was able to visit both Treorchy and Tonypandy high streets, talk to many businesses there, and there are lessons that different communities can learn from one another where success has been achieved, and then to apply some of those lessons elsewhere. And it was great to have the opportunity to be there with my colleague Buffy Williams and to have those conversations. Now, businesses in Wales, Llywydd, know that they have a 12-month small business rate relief holiday for the whole of the coming year. And that is in sharp distinction to what will happen across our border, of course, where those businesses will have to start paying rates again halfway through this financial year. I agree that there is a need to rethink the whole system of how we raise local taxation. But that is not an argument against having local taxes raised. Businesses benefit from all the public services which allow them to trade successfully, whether that is building roads and pavements that take their customers to them, whether it is making sure that when their employees fell sick, that they are able to use the National Health Service, or whether it is in the great investment that we make in education and skills to make sure that there is a workforce there for the future. Businesses benefit from all of that, and it is right that they make a contribution to the conditions that allow them to succeed. How we do it, I agree, is a different matter. And there are a number of ideas in different parts of the United Kingdom that we will want to draw on as we think of ways in which we can make that system more effective for the future.
Kevin Campbell.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Madam Llywydd, a llongyfarchiadau chi ar gael eich ethol a llongyfarchiadau i'r Prif Weinidog yn yr un modd. Yng nghwestiwn i yw hwn, a fydde'r Prif Weinidog yn cytuno a fi bod heriau economaidd arbennig yn wynebu y cymunedau gwledig Cymru sydd angen mynd i'r afel yn nhw fel mater o frys. Fi fydd wrth gwrs yn ymwybodol fod lefelau incwm y pen a lefelau sgiliau yn yr ardaloedd hyn yn is na chyfartaledd Cymru. A mae'n hysbys iddo hefyd bod yr argyfwng ailgartrefi fel ein ni'n clywed yn barod gan Llŷn a Biorwerth, diffyg tai fforddiadwy ynghyd â diffyg swyddi o ansawdd yn arwen at allfudo gan bobl ifanc sy'n cael effaith niweidiol ar ddemograffi a'r ffabric cymdeithasol. A mae effaith hyn wrth gwrs yn niweidiol iawn i'r iaith Gymraeg mewn ardaloedd lle mae'r Gymraeg yn para i fod yn iaith fyw. Felly, ydy'r Prif Weinidog yn barod i dderbyn bod angen i'r Llywodraeth roi blaenoriaeth i ddatblygu strategaeth a chynllun gweithredu penodol i adfywion hardaloedd gwledig, lle mae'r holl elfennau economaidd, cymdeithasol a diwylliannol yn gallu dod at ei gilydd mewn ffordd integredig a holistaidd. Ac ar ôl 2 flynedd ar hugain, does na ddim ffocws penodol mor bell a dwi'n gwybod Prif Weinidog wedi cael ei rhoi i'n hardaloedd gwledig ni. Ydy yn cytuno bod angen i hyn i newid?
Wel, diolch yn fawr i'r Mr Campbell am y cwestiwn na, ac wrth gwrs mae'r cyd-destun yn heriol i bob cwr o Gymru ar ôl y pandemig. Mae lot o her yn yr ardaloedd y gwledig fel mae Kevin Campbell wedi sôn amdano, ond mae'n heriol, dwi'n gallu ddweud iddo fe, yn glan yr afon yr etholad yn canol y ddinas. Mae'r heriau yn wahanol, ond mae heriau yna am hob man. Dwi ddim cweit yn cytuno da fe dros y cyfnod o ddatganoli i gyd, ni ddim wedi ganolbwyntio ar pethau gwledig oedd y llywyrdd a'i hunan yn y gweinidog dros y cefn gwlad yn Llywodraeth Cymru'n 1, ac yn y tymor diwetha, oeddwn ni'n defnyddio'r adroddiad gyda Rodri Glyn Thomas ar sut allwn ni defnyddio'r iaith Cymraeg fel rhywbeth sy'n gallu hybu datblygiad economaidd yn yr gorllewin. So, ni wedi wneud nifer o pethau pwysig. Wrth gwrs, mae fwy ni'n gallu wneud, a dwi'n edrych ymlaen i trafod gyda'r aelodau a llawer y Senedd syniadau i helpu y cefn gwlad Cymru, cymunedau gwledig, gyda cymunedau eraill sy'n wynebu dyfodol sy'n heriol pan ni'n trial i dod mas o'r cyfnod anodd diwetha.
Cwestiynau nawr gan arweinwyr y pleidiau, arweinydd y ceidwadwyr Andrew Watty Davies.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, I'm used to my fair share of negative headlines in the Western Mail, but last week the Western Mail carried a headline that said, businesses stabbed in the back by Drakeford. It went on inside to say that they feel punched in the stomach by the current Welsh Government. Do you think that's a fair reflection of the support that you've given to businesses since the pandemic started?
Well, the headline was a quotation from press releases put out by his party. Yes. Maybe he ought to read his own press releases before he reads the Western Mail. Llywydd, to put to me a headline in a newspaper inspired by his own party as though this was somehow fair comment, well, really, it's not a good start, is it, to his first question on the floor here. Is it a fair comment? Of course not.
It's a very fair comment, because actually that comment came from a business owner in North Wales, First Minister. It wasn't a comment from a Conservative press release.
I've seen the press release.
But we have passed comment of the lack of support that you have put on the table for businesses the length and breadth of Wales. Why haven't you put support for start-up grants to make sure that businesses can recapitalise themselves? We know that you've got £140 million still unallocated from the £200 million that you identified during the election campaign. Is it not a fair reflection that businesses need to be recapitalised? And when you have comments like that, that's not politicians' comments, that's business owners themselves commenting that they feel let down by the Welsh Government. So will you today outline what you will do with the additional £140 million that you have available in the Welsh Government's budget to support businesses here in Wales?
Well, Llywydd, there's a more sensible question in that contribution. But let me put a few facts on the record first. Here in Wales, we have allocated £2.3 billion in coronavirus grants and reliefs to businesses in Wales. What have we received from his government at Westminster in order to fund that £2.3 billion? We've received £1.9 billion in business consequentials. If it is his serious proposition from his sedentary position that we should have used money given to us for the coronavirus care of patients to put... So I hear the Leader of the Opposition saying to me that we've had £6 billion from the UK Government, as though all of that were available for businesses. Is it his serious proposition that we should have used the money given to us for TTP purposes, for vaccination purposes, for catch-up purposes in our schools, but all of that should have been used for business support in Wales? If it is, let him say it. It was a choice he could have offered. I don't suppose, however, he is at all. We have received £1.9 billion in consequentials, and we have provided £2.3 billion, £400 million more for businesses in Wales than they would have had they been on the other side of the border. Now, his question about how we use the money that is still set aside is an important one. And my colleague Vaughan Gethin is, I know, working with his officials to design the best use of that money alongside businesses who have been most affected, and particularly those businesses who will most go on being affected by coronavirus restrictions. We have to move on from a period in which almost all businesses needed help to concentrating that help on those for whom conditions mean they cannot resume full operation. That is the conversation we are having. That is how we will recalibrate that funding. I want it to go where it will make the greatest difference.
Well, I appreciate the First Minister wants to use diversionary tactics time and time again, but it is a fact that comments I put to you were comments from business owners themselves, feeling punched in the stomach or stabbed in the back by the government of the day, which is your government, First Minister. It is a fact that you have that money unallocated in the budget, and businesses need that money now. They don't need to wait another month, another 6 weeks. These are businesses themselves talking that they need the money now, because they need to recapitalise after being the longest part of the United Kingdom shut down, because we shut down before other parts of the United Kingdom did. But the other important area of the economy to get comfort from the Welsh Government and understanding about the rules and regulations is the hospitality sector and the events sector, importantly. And I appreciate this is a very fine balancing act because we know the Indian variant is taking hold in parts of the United Kingdom and indeed here in Wales. But what is the First Minister's view on the regulations that the event sectors in particular will have to deal with going forward when we know other parts of the United Kingdom have a date of June the 21st? I appreciate that date might move, First Minister. I appreciate that date might move, but I note today the Celtic Manors manager is saying that they are unable to attract businesses into Wales because of the current rules that exist. So are you able to offer us any view of the way the Welsh Government see things panning out in the late summer and early autumn with the restrictions that the event sector and the hospitality sector have to operate here in Wales?
Sorry, I'll deal with the very first part of the member's question first. So one of the very first decisions I made on resuming this job after the election was to release £66 million from that £200 million to go directly to businesses in Wales. By the end of the second day of that fund being open, nearly 2,000 applications had been received for £10.1 million. And by today, awards have already been offered to the first of those businesses to apply, and that money will be with them by the start of next week. That money is designed to support those businesses through the month of May and through the month of June as well, at which point we will be able to, through discussions with the sectors, agree how some of the remaining money can then best be deployed. So just want to be clear with members that no business is left unable to claim support. Businesses are already claiming support from the £66 million. Decisions to award funding have already been made and the money is on its way to them. It is a very important point that the member raises about hospitality and events sector, and I wish I could give them a more definite answer than I'm able to. We've moved to level 2 restrictions. The Cabinet will be considering this week and next whether or not it is sufficiently safe in Wales to move to level 1 restrictions, and that would further liberalise the ability of hospitality and events sectors to get back to business. Of course, that is what we want to happen. We want to be in a sufficiently strong position that those sectors can reopen safely and be able to attract customers back to them. I know in the next question, Llywydd, we'll be talking about pilot events that we are holding to learn lessons how that can best be done. But the context within which we are making those decisions is a genuinely challenging one. The India variant of coronavirus is already in Wales, as the Leader of the Opposition acknowledged. Across our border, it is now in community spread. It is doubling every 5 to 7 days in those communities. We know it is more transmissible. We know that the vaccine is less effective in dealing with it. The Royal Bolton Hospital yesterday issued an appeal from its chief executive for patients not to attend there because of the pressure that hospital is under because of the coronavirus outbreak in that city. 8 people in critical care in that one hospital in England, more than twice the number of people in critical care in the whole of Wales. We've just got to go on very carefully, looking at that context, seeing any impact that there may be in Wales, and then make decisions which are as helpful to the sector as we can be, without doing what the sector itself has asked us all along, not to find ourselves in a position where, having opened up the sector, we're in a position of having to close it down again. It is, as the Leader of the Opposition said, a very finely balanced set of judgments, and we'll continue to make those judgments over the next week as further data comes in from what is happening across our border and the numbers we now see here in Wales.
Arweinydd Plaid Cymru, Adam Price.
Diolch, Llywydd. The people of Wales voted this month by a margin of more than 2 to 1 for parties that stood on a platform of greater powers for the Senedd. Westminster's reaction to this mandate so far has been not just to ignore it, but to seek to reverse it. They have a plan for Wales. It just doesn't involve us. The Senedd bypassed on the replacement to EU funds. Transport for Wales rebranded as Great British Railways, Wales to get a free port whether we like it or not, and maybe even a tunnel in the Celtic Sea, floated without consultation and built presumably like the M4 relief road without our consent. If you add to this list the internal market bill, the Australia trade deal, and a UK government hub seemingly conceived as some imperial outpost, doesn't Westminster's strategy increasingly look like abolition by stealth?
Llywydd, I have to agree with the Leader of Plaid Cymru that the charge sheet against the present UK government is a long and a serious one. The so-called plan for Wales, a plan made for Wales without Wales. Not a single conversation with the government of Wales in its production. Not so much as an invitation to a single conversation with the Secretary of State before it was published, or even an invitation to its launch. I must say, it was deliberate, it was provocative, and it was intended to be so. Now, I'd say to members on the Conservative benches here that if we are serious about the future of the United Kingdom, and I'm certainly serious about that topic, we cannot fashion a future for it if the UK government thinks that the way that that future will be fashioned is to try to roll back the settlements that have been agreed in 2 referendums here in Wales. And yet every day, that is what they do. And while they do it, then people who believe in the separation of Wales from the United Kingdom will find the arguments that the Leader of Plaid Cymru has made already this afternoon.
Another example, Westminster's latest assault on Welsh democracy involves the £500 bonus for health and care staff in Wales. Not content on taxing it, Westminster now appears to be using it as an excuse to cut people's benefits. So instead of receiving a thank you bonus, many workers will be punished with a deduction of up to 63% in their universal credit. If we controlled our own welfare and tax policy here, none of this would happen, of course. Now, you recently reiterated, First Minister, your personal opposition to the devolution of tax and benefits in a wholesale way, as for you, they are part of the glue that holds the United Kingdom together. Perhaps, though, even you might now concede that glue is coming decidedly unstuck. What is the collective view of the new Welsh Government on the devolution of welfare?
Well, Llywydd, I'm going to have to gently suggest to the Leader of Plaid Cymru that the election is over. And the idea of independence was very thoroughly tested in this election, and people in Wales made their decision on that issue. So the policy of my party on the benefit system is that we should seriously explore, as John Griffiths, leading the local government committee in the last Senedd, did on our behalf, the devolution of the administration of parts of the benefit system. But the benefit system itself should be an engine of redistribution right across the United Kingdom. The fact that it is temporarily under the control of a party who doesn't regard it in that way is not a criticism of the potential which that system has always had to move money from those who have more than they need to those who need more of it to sustain an ordinary lifestyle. I think that is still one of the things that has the potential to hold the United Kingdom together. I very much regret that we have failed to persuade the UK government not to tax the lump sum we've been able to provide to social care workers, and the fact that it is being used as evidence of income for the benefit system is an even bigger blow to those people who work every day in that sector to earn a living and now find the money that was provided to them from the Welsh Government being taken away from them by the UK Government through universal credit.
The election may be over, First Minister, but the bitter legacy of deep poverty and inequality in our communities, which is bequeathed to us by this deeply unequal United Kingdom, that persists. The 31% of our children in Wales that are living in poverty. How can you argue that the Union has been a force for untrammeled good for them? Contrast that with New Zealand. This last week, a radical well-being budget passed by the government there, which will drive down child poverty This year, to half the level in Wales, that's a Labour government, but of an independent country that has the power to choose its own future. Now, you as a government are pledged to lead a new national civic conversation on the constitutional future of Wales. Will it be a genuinely open conversation, open to the possibilities of independence? And yes, the challenges too, open to it at least as a plan B if Wales says yes to radical federalism, but Westminster continues to say no to Wales. Now, that would be a conversation I and my party would be happy to join.
Well, Llywydd, I'm looking forward very much to being able to develop plans for that civic conversation. I want to do it with parties right across the chamber who have a serious interest in the future of the United Kingdom and Wales' place within it. And I don't define any ideas out of that conversation, because if it's a civic conversation, then citizens will have the ability to make that contribution. And all those possibilities will be able to be rehearsed within it. I'll just say again, Llywydd, we had an election in which the choice could not have been clearer. There were parties who stood who believed that this whole institution should be abolished and that the governance of Wales should be handed back to Westminster, and they didn't succeed in gaining support to be represented here. There was a party that believed that Wales should be taken out of the United Kingdom, and if any party stands on that proposition and wins an election, then it has a mandate to take that forward. But until it wins an election, it cannot expect that the centre of gravity of the discussion about our future will be dragged to a proposition that failed to command the support of enough people in Wales to give it a majority here on the floor of the Senedd.
Cwestiwn 3, Llyr Griffith.
Diolch Llywydd. Pa wersi mae Llywodraeth Cymru wedi dysgu o'r digwyddiadau prawf peilot sydd wedi cynnal mwyn datblygu prosesau a chanllawiau fydd yn caniatáu i ddigwyddiadau ddychwelyd yn ddiogel yng Nghymru?
Llywydd, diolch i'r Llyr Griffith am y cwestiwn. Mae cynnydd da yn cael ei wneud gyda'r raglen digwyddiadau pilot, ac mae 5 digwyddiad wedi cael eu cynnal yn barod. Bydd y wybodaeth sy'n dod i'r amlwg, enghraifft o ran cynnal profion Covid ar gyfer digwyddiadau, yn cael ei defnyddio i baratoi ar gyfer yr adolygiad 21 diwrnod nesaf. Byddwn ni'n ystyried y posibilrwydd o ddatblygu dull fesul cam o ail agor digwyddiadau.
Fi'n dda wrth gwrs gweld torfeydd yng Nghymru Abertawe a Chasnewydd yn ddiweddar ar exam gobeithio cyn bo hir, ond llach bo chi wrth gwrs wedi blaenoriaethu tîmau pêl-droed sy'n chwarae yng Nghynghreiriau Lloegr. Dwi eisiau gwybod pam eich bod chi wedi anwybyddu'r tîmau sy'n chwarae wrth gwrs yn ein prif gynghrair genedlaethol ni yma yng Nghymru. Dyw'r clybiau yn y pyramid Saesnig ddim yn gynrychioliadol o drwch y gêm domestig, ac mi fydde peilota digwyddiadau yn y Cymru Premier er enghraifft wedi bod yn llawer mwy perthnasol i weddill y clybiau ar lawr gwlad ar hyd a lled Cymru. Ac onid yw un ffars fod cefnogwyr y Cymru Premier nawr yn gorfod stwffio fewn i dafarndau i wylio gemau, neu yn wir i gwylio nhw o'r clybaws sy'n ffinio ar cae, yn lle gwneud hynny o'r eistedleoedd yn yr awyr agored gyda ymbellau cymdeithasol. Dyw i ddim yn rhy hwyr wrth gwrs i newid hynny, ac felly anewch chi ail ystyried caniatáu rhywfaint o gefnogwyr i fynychu'r gêm derfynol, dyngedfennol ola o'r tymor rhwng Caernarfon a Drenewydd ddydd Sadwrn yma. Gêm fwyaf, wrth gwrs, yn hanes Clwb Pêl-droed Caernarfon.
Wel, Llywydd, allai i ddweud pob lwc i Wrexham i ddechrau ar dydd Sadwrn. Gobeithio bydd Wrexham yn ymuno â Abertawe a'r Casnewydd yn y llwyddiant maen nhw'n wedi gael yn barod. Pethau ymarferol oedd Llywydd, pan o'n nhw'n gwneud y ddewis o'r ble oedd y pilots yn gallu cael a'i redeg. Mae lot fawr o gwaith tu ôl o pilots. Mae'n amhosibl jyst i ddweud, o allwch chi ddweud a di Sadwrn mae rhywbeth arall yn gallu digwydd. Mae'r Iechyd Cyhoeddus Cymru yn rhan o'r pilots, bob pilot, a'r awdurdodau lleol, rhan o bob pilot, ac beth bynnag ni'n defnyddio am y pilot, mae'r grŵp lleol yn rhan o'r pilot hefyd. So, oedd e just ddim yn ymarferol i wneud pilots ym mhob man ac am pob peth, ac i wneud nhw yn ddiogel. Dyna pam ni wedi cael restr o 5 digwyddiad, a dyna pam ni'n mynd i dysgu'r wersi i weld os allwn ni wneud fwy yn y dyfodol, ond i wneud mewn ffordd sy'n ddiogel I bobl sy'n troi lan I weld beth sy'n mynd ymlaen ac yn llwyddiannus I bobl sy'n redeg y digwyddiadau hefyd.
Saunders.
And my congratulations to you and our First Minister, to you both for your new, current respective roles. It's nice to be back here on the floor of the Chamber and indeed as an elected member of this Senedd, and I thank the people of Aberconwy for bestowing what is a huge privilege. Now, whilst the pilot test events to develop processes and guidance are to be welcomed, your own current Welsh Government guidance for the arts sector does have a major contradictory point. The actual wording is causing a dilemma for one of our leading Aberconwy music festivals, which is soon, hopefully, to be taking place within a local church. So I ask you, First Minister, why does your guidance entitled Rehearsing, Performing and Taking Part in the Performing Arts allow wind instruments to be played indoors, but the guidance on reopening places of worship prohibits those wind instruments to be used? Your planning has also hit a duff note with our larger scale outdoor events. Indeed, Adam Newton, Tough Runner UK, has referred to the Welsh Government as only having half a plan. So therefore, will you put a roadmap in place for larger scale events to recommence and for this to include across a wider variety of settings, thereby bringing some normality back to our much held long traditions? Diolch.
Well, Llywydd, as I explained in answer to an earlier question, if we are able, and it's an if, isn't it, if we are able to move to alert level 1 at the end of this 3-week review, then that will come with new possibilities for events to resume indoors and outdoors across Wales. When that happens, they will still necessarily have to observe the protections that we have against the resumption of coronavirus. And that is where the guidance always begins, and that is where this government has often taken a different view to the member. I believe our starting point always is, how can we keep people safe in these events? How can we make sure that they are run in a way that does not create avoidable risks of coronavirus beginning to circulate again? That's why the guidance is provided. That's why it differentiates between what can be done in one context and another. It is always carefully drawn up. It is always based on the best advice that we can. And while it may appear, while it may sometimes appear to be inconsistent, that is because the context will be different in a way that leads to that different advice. Where people ask us to explain more why the restrictions are necessary, then of course we try to do that. But the restrictions are never intentionally perverse, and they always start from that question, what can be done safely here in the context that coronavirus poses for us at any one time? My hope, and I know it's the hope that the member has, is that circumstances continue to improve. And as they continue to improve, so more will be able to be restored in terms of outdoor events and the performance, singing, musical instruments indoors as well. But the limiting factor always has to be doing things in a way that does not put Wales and people at risk.
Jack Sargent.
Diolch, Llywydd, and First Minister, it is good to be back. And since we were talking about the Cymru Premier League, I will take this opportunity now as a proudest club ambassador in Wales and put on the record my congratulations to the Nomads for keeping the title in Wales. First Minister, I would be grateful if you could update the Chamber on the test and trace pilots being carried out in the 5 parts of North Wales, and if you could outline the specific detail of the extra support being provided to those self-isolating.
Well, thank Jack Sargent for that. He's right, of course, there's more than one sort of pilot going on in North Wales at the moment, and congratulations, of course, to the good people of Connors Quay in the success that the Nomads have had this season. The pilots, Llywydd, that Jack Sargent refers to are the pilots that we are carrying out to provide additional help beyond the £500 self-isolation payment that we make to people who we ask to self-isolate for their own protection and protection of others, and where they don't have sufficient income to make that possible. Now, what we've learnt is, from work already carried out in the Cwm Taf area, that there are other forms of help that you can add to the money that make a difference to people's ability to self-isolate in the way that we would like them to do. Sometimes that's immediate help with food and with fuel poverty. Sometimes it's help with longer-term issues such as mental health support and digital exclusion. There are going to be 5 pilots across North Wales. The one in Holyhead has already begun. I'm sure that the local member will know that it's operating out of the CAB office in Holyhead. And on the 7th and the 14th of June, further pilots will begin. They're designed to offer further help to people to make sure that those for whom self-isolation is a greater challenge than others get not just the money that we're able to provide, but extra support to make that experience more manageable for them. We learn a lot from the pilots, and then the things that are successful and make a difference, the plan will be to do more of that on a more wider geographical basis.
Cwestiwn 4, Russell George.
What support has the Welsh Government provided to businesses affected by the COVID-19 restrictions?
Llywydd, we have committed more than £2 billion in support for businesses, and more than £1.9 billion of that £2 billion has already reached them. The latest package opened on Monday to applications. Further funding will follow to help businesses develop, sustain and grow.
First Minister, the latest package that you referred to was in regards to support which businesses could see for the first time when the eligibility checker opened last Monday, and businesses were left disappointed and let down. I don't think it's right to dismiss the views of businesses, as I think you did to the Leader of the Opposition earlier today. What causes further frustration to businesses is when they keep hearing the Welsh Government repeat this line that they're offering the best business support of other UK nations, because the reality is that the offer is far more generous in Scotland and England in terms of business support under the current announcements that you've made. We know gyms in England will receive 18,000 to reopen. In Wales is only up to 5,000. Hospitality sector in England have reopening grants. In Wales, we've got pubs and other eating establishments that are not able to claim because the criteria is too strict. And when it comes to the criteria, there's a long list of criteria to meet, such as providing evidence that there's a minimum of 60% reduction in trade in turnover over the last 12 months. But many businesses simply can't do that because they've not yet had those counts produced. You can't rewind fully the clock in terms of the business support that was missing in April in Wales, but you can address and plug the gaps in announcements going forward. So can I ask you, First Minister, to revisit business support schemes, ensure that they're comparable with support elsewhere in the UK, and ensure particularly that their criteria is not so strict and rigid and businesses can access funding fairly and appropriately?
Well, Llywydd, I don't dismiss the views of businesses, but I do dismiss the propaganda efforts of the Welsh Conservative Party. And we've just had another effort at it again. I certainly will not give you an undertaking that we will match what happens elsewhere in the United Kingdom, because that would mean that thousands and thousands of pounds would no longer be available to Welsh businesses. In Wales, a 10-employee hospitality business with a rateable value of £25,000 will have been eligible for more than £52,000 since December. The equivalent business in England would have received £26,000. So if I were to match the offer in England, as the member asks me to, I would be taking £26,000 back from that business. He says to me that gyms will get £18,000. What percentage of businesses in England does he think get £18,000? I don't suppose he knows. It's 2%. 2% of businesses get £18,000, and 98% of businesses get nothing like it. You know, I think when we are making comparisons, there is no point in the member cherry-picking figures and then applying them in a way that simply would not operate in the real world. And I certainly don't agree with him about criteria. We are giving out major sums of public money, major millions and millions of pounds of public money going to businesses as we wanted to do. But his party would be the first to complain if we were not doing that in a way that could demonstrate that those were real businesses, that they were entitled to that help, and that the public money was being spent in a way that was defensible. That's what the criteria are there for. They're not to make it difficult for businesses to get the help they want. They are there to make sure that here in Wales, when businesses get money from the taxpayer, that that money goes to the right place and goes in a way that is defensible.
Luke Fletcher.
Diolch, Llywydd. As I've said previously, I know there are many businesses that are grateful for the support they've received so far. But there must now be, I think, some recognition from Welsh Government of the cost businesses are facing as they reopen. And I come back to the hospitality sector in particular here, given all the years I spent in the sector. You know, for example, restocking perishable goods and bringing staff back from furlough is proving tricky, especially when many of these businesses are reliant on decent weather to open up. And we know that several firms abandoned opportunities to reopen outdoors before the indoor reopening was allowed. And even then, businesses can't utilise their full indoor space and are struggling to trade outdoors in poor weather. Ultimately, there's been a gap in funding. Businesses shelve plans due to the weather, and they're unable to operate at full capacity. I am grateful for the opportunity provided by the Economy Minister to meet with him and other opposition party spokespeople to discuss this in 2 weeks' time. And I'm looking forward to working constructively on this. But there is an urgent need for flexibility of funding now to help offset the risks that businesses continue to face. So can I add my voice to the cause of many others and press on the First Minister and through him the Economy Minister to urgently move on this because businesses need the security now and not in a fortnight's time. And I'm pretty sure I can speak for Plaid Cymru when I say that we're eager to get the ball rolling now.
Well, Llywydd, I recognise the points that the member makes about the challenges that businesses face when they are resuming trading, whether that is the restocking issue, whether it is the weather. But the Welsh Government has provided help to businesses at every step of the way. I've heard allegations earlier that there was no help for businesses during the month of April, for example. But at the end of March and at the start of April, we paid out more than £147 million to businesses in NDR grants. In April, at the start of May, a further sum of over £24 million reached businesses through the Economic Resilience Fund. And now there is another £66 million available to help those businesses during the rest of this month and through next month as well. I wanted to do what Mr Fletcher has suggested. I wanted to reach those businesses where the trading conditions are the most challenging and where the inevitable restrictions that are still there in order to deal with coronavirus place restrictions on what they are able to do. That's why we will have the discussions with other parties, but with businesses and business organisations themselves, to make sure that the remainder of the £200 million that we've already set aside can be targeted in that way so that those who are most affected and continue to be affected by trading conditions are able to get the maximum help we are able to offer.
Sarah Murphy.
Diolch, Llywydd, and congratulations to you and David on your election as Llywydd and Deputy Presiding Officer. First Minister, over the election campaign, businesses across Bridgend and Porthcawl got in touch with me to pass on their thanks for the way that you and your government have handled the coronavirus pandemic throughout the last year, particularly to acknowledge the financial support that has been put in place for businesses that have had to close through the bespoke Wales-only Economic Resilience Fund, which has saved over 160,000 jobs. Do you agree with me that if your government had followed England's approach, throughout the lockdown, as the Conservatives have so often suggested, Welsh businesses would have been left worse off and more jobs would have been lost.
Thank Sarah Murphy for that question. Congratulate her on her election and for speaking in the Chamber for the first time. I met many businesses with her in the Bridgend area who went out of their way to tell us how much they appreciated the support that they had had from the UK government and from the Welsh government as well. It's very easy for some members in the Chamber to amplify the voices of those people who feel they have a grievance, but the vast bulk of businesses in Wales who have had help from the UK government and from the Welsh government recognise the help that they have received. It may not do everything they want. It certainly doesn't wipe away all the challenges they face. But they have appreciated the help that's been available, the speed at which it's been available, the way in which it has allowed them to plot a path through the pandemic and now hopefully beyond it. And the experience that the member refers to, I think, is far, far more typical of the way that businesses in Wales have responded than some of the complaints that we've heard earlier this afternoon.
Cwestiwn 5, Rhys Bowen.
Diolch yn fawr I chi, Llywydd, a dwi wedi datgan bydd ynglyn â'r cwestiwn hwn. Prif Weinidog, will you please provide a timetable for the implementation of the Commission on Justice in Wales report?
Diolch yn fawr I Rhys Llywydd am y cwestiwn. Where implementation of the Commission's recommendations does not rely on the UK government, progress has already been made, for example, in the creation of a Law Council of Wales. The Cabinet's Justice Committee will be re-established to pursue the case made by the Commission for the devolution of policing and justice to Wales.
Diolch yn fawr I chi am eich ateb, Prif Weinidog. Dwi'n gobeithio y bydd modd I ni weld amserlen fwy pendant o siwt I bod y Llywodraeth yn bwriadu I implementeiddio yr argymhellion yn wneud â Llywodraeth Cymru. Pam des I fan hyn fel bachgen ysgol yn 1999 I agoriad y cynulliad, byddwn ni byth wedi dychmygu byddwn ni'n sefyll yn Senedd Cymru yn holi cwestiwn. Ac ni'n ddiolchgar iawn yn dyn ni nifer o'r criw 99, nifer ohonynt o bob plaid wedi gadael Senedd diwetha, am y seiliau cadarn y maen nhw wedi gosod I ni. A fi'n falch bod un o'r criw gweddill o 99 yn bwrw'r gwaith ymlaen gyda diwygio y Senedd. Ond cam pwysig ymlaen, Prif Weinidog, yw sicrhau bod cyfiawnder, bod plismona yn cael ei ddatganoli I Gymru. Dwi'n ddiolchgar iawn I Llywodraeth Cymru am gamu I radwy yn dilyn toriadau llym y blaid gydwadol yn San Steffan, a'i cyfraniad arferthol maen nhw'n wneud i'r system gyfiawnder. Hyd at 20% o'r gwariant y system gyfiawnder yn dod o fan hyn. Ond mae hynny yn creu problem. Problem nath yr Arglwydd Thomas ei godi yn yr adroddiad, a hynny yw problem craffu. Does dim digon o graffu yn digon am y gwariant sylweddol sy'n dod o Llywodraeth Cymru. Sut fyddech chi, fel Llywodraeth, yn hyrwyddo craffu pellach ar y gwariant sylweddol yna sy'n neud impact mawr ar fywydau cymaint o bobl yng Nghymru? Diolch yn fawr.
Wel, Llywydd, diolch yn fawr I Rhys Bowen am y cwestiwn gyntaf, ers iddo gael ei ethol, a hoffwn cydnabod hefyd Llywydd arbenigedd penodol Rhys Bowen yn y maes hwn ar ôl y gwaith oedd e'n wneud I helpu creu adroddiad Comisiwn Thomas fel rhan o'r dîm ysgrifenedigaeth. Mae safbwynt Llywodraeth Cymru yn glir. Rydyn ni'n credu y dylid datganoli cyfiawnder. I ni nid yw'r mater mwyach o ofyn a ddyled hynny digwydd, ond sut a phryd. Nawr, yn y maes craffu, dwi wedi ofyn i'r Council Gyffredinol I cymryd arweinyddiaeth yn y maes yma. Bydd yn cadeirio isbwyllgor y Cabinet ar adroddiad Thomas ac ar cyfiawnder, a bydd cyfleon, dwi'n siŵr, i'r aelodau roi cwestiynau iddo fe am yr amserlen, am y gwaith ni'n wneud fewnol I Gymru gyda'r amgynhellion yn yr adroddiad ni'n gallu wneud yn y dwylo ni, ond hefyd i ofyn cwestiynau am a gwaith ni'n mynd i wneud i trial i tynnu Llywodraeth a Deyrnas Unedig i fewn unwaith eto i'r sgwrs ar yr adroddiad. Adroddiad oedd yn wneud a'r achos am ddatganoli yn y maes cyfiawnder mor glir i ni gyd.
Cwestiwn 6, Alun Davies.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the Welsh Government's approach to recovery from COVID-19 in Blaenau Gwent?
So we thank the member for the question. We will use all our efforts and energies to create a stronger, fairer and greener Wales when no one is held back or left behind. Climate change, green jobs and recovery from the long and terrible pandemic will be at the heart of our new programme for government.
I'm grateful to the First Minister for that and grateful for the way in which he has led the Welsh Government's response to COVID over the last year or so. And there are many aspects to recovery from COVID, which the First Minister has already described. But today, I would like again to focus on the future of our town centres. First Minister John Griffiths spoke earlier today on the future of Newport and our cities, but our towns face a very different challenge to our cities. And I would like to hear from yourself, if possible, how you will be able to address the immediate situation in supporting businesses and persuading people to use their local town centres. But then, secondly, in the longer term, town centres, as you've already said this afternoon, were under pressure long before COVID. And we've seen towns such as Abertillery or Ebbw Vale, Tredigwr or Bryn Mawr suffer over a number of years. How is the Welsh Government going to work in the longer term as well as the immediate term to create a renaissance for our towns and our town centres?
So I thank Alan Davies for that important question. He will know that the Transforming Towns programme of this government has provided £110 million worth of investment in Welsh towns in the last 12 months alone. That's reinforced by the Town Centre First principle that the Cabinet adopted during the last term, making it clear that when major investments from the public purse, whether that is in education, health or public services, are being considered, town centres should be the first consideration for all decisions on the location of workplaces and services. And there are some very good examples of that in the member's own constituency. The importance of community pharmacies. They're on the high street in every town right across Wales and supported significantly by this Welsh Government, drawing people into town centres, providing an anchor store that others can grow around. We put a lot of recent money into recycling centres in the middle of towns. Circular Economy Fund has supported the development of a new reuse shop in Ebbw Vale itself, and Blaenau Gwent County Borough Council has provided the first ever online repair directory in Wales, highlighting opportunities that exist within towns in the borough for people to reuse and re-equip themselves for use in the future. I'm very glad that we've been able to provide over £200,000 to support free access to town centre Wi-Fi in Ebbw Vale, in Bryn Mawr, in Abertillery and in Blaenau, because that is an example of the longer-term investment to which Alan Davies referred. We need to make sure that the infrastructure is there on the high street for commercial operations to be able to operate in contemporary circumstances. And you can see that already happening in those towns in the member's constituency. And finally, I know that he has taken a strong personal interest in the Welsh Government's plans for co-working hubs beyond the cities. Many members, many residents in his constituency will travel to work beyond the boundaries of the borough. Now, we are investing £100,000 to create a co-working hub at Parc Bryn Bach in Tredigwr, and that's just one example of those co-working hubs we're creating across valley communities so that people will be able to work remotely, continue to work from home from part of the week, and then at other points come to a centre where they can meet other people, use shared facilities, spend their money in the town centres and in the places where they live and work. And again, that is part of the longer-term plan that this government has for the reinvention of those town centres, so that there are better jobs, closer to home, and people are able to live and work in the communities that matter the most to them.
Cwestiwn 7, Mike Hedges.
Diolch, Llywydd. Will the First Minister make a statement on the economic benefits of home working?
Well, thank Mike Hedges for that, Llywydd. There are economic benefits for businesses and individuals, including reduced costs for travel and overheads. More remote working can also bring more footfall to local town centres. This is why we are trialling local work hubs across Wales, as we've just discussed. Other important benefits include reducing carbon emissions and improved work-life balance.
I was also going to say another advantage is reduced traffic jams on motorways. But people work in offices because when everything was paper-based, they had to in order to access data and update files. There's been a movement towards home working, with numbers slowly increasing well before the large increase during lockdown. 9 out of 10 employees who worked at home during lockdown would like to continue working at home in some capacity, with around 1 in 2 employees wanting to work at home often or all of the time. But home working has advantages to employers, as you've outlined, and employees, but it does affect larger towns and city centres by reduction in footfall in those. The question I would ask, though, should there be a working from home allowance to cover the costs for people working from home when they have to pay for electric and gas and other things all day?
Well, so with members in this chamber will be members who were here in the last Senedd will know that our own staff in constituencies, through the work of the Commission, we were able to claim a home working allowance for them during the pandemic. And that matter has been discussed at the Social Partnership Council, and I know that it will be on the agenda of future meetings of the Council as well. Whether it is the right answer in all circumstances, I think, is more open to debate, but clearly it has been recognised in some contexts already, including here in the Senedd, and it will be an important discussion because, as Mike Hedges knows, the Welsh Government has a long-term ambition for 30% of staff at any one time to be working remotely, and we have to create the conditions in which that can be done successfully.
Finally, cwestiwn 8, Jane Bryant.
Diolch, Llywydd. Will the First Minister provide an update on the work of the South East Wales Transport Commission?
Llywydd, we have appointed Simon Gibson, CBE, as Chair of the Burns Delivery Board, who will oversee the progression of the 58 Burns recommendations by the unit set up for that purpose in Transport for Wales. A budget of over £4 million has already been approved for that work to make sure that we can take the recommendations of the Commission forward.
Thank you, First Minister. The Burns Commission has laid out exciting and deliverable improvements to the transport system in and around Newport, a public transport system that Newport deserves, made possible by forward-thinking and strategic investment by the Welsh Government. With the delivery unit in place, the focus and pace must be kept up, ensuring we see tangible results in Newport. However, key parts of this plan involve the upgrading of rail network infrastructure, an area where the UK Government has responsibility. Over the last few years, Wales has only received 2% of Network Rail's enhancement projects, despite having around 10% of the UK rail network. The UK Government talks a good game on investment, but seldom delivers. Will the First Minister continue to encourage them to put their money where their mouth is and deliver the rail investment that Wales both needs and deserves?
Well, thank Jane Bryant for that. Thank you to her for what she said about the investments the Welsh Government has already made, the £70 million to secure additional services, rail services between Ebbw Vale and Newport. And I'm very pleased to see that agreement has now been reached on extending on-demand flexi buses to cover the whole of the Newport City local bus network. And that's been funded by revenue and capital, provided in partnership with Newport City Council, and that will play an important part in providing that local public transport network to which Jane Bryant referred. But as she will know, the major recommendation of the Burns Review was for proper investment in the main rail line to create new commuting possibilities that would serve the people not just of Newport but of Cardiff and further beyond. Now, the Hendy Review, the Union Connectivity Review set up by the Prime Minister, published its interim report on the 10th of March. It pointed to the success of transport devolution, and amongst its first recommendations are that the UK government take up that recommendation from the Burns Review and provide the investment that is needed to make that rail network an effective way of moving people across South Wales. Now, I make a serious point to the Leader of the Opposition that if the UK government genuinely wants to demonstrate its commitment to union connectivity, then here is an idea that is ready for it to take up. An idea developed in detail by the Burns Commission, endorsed in the Hendy Review, and ready to go. And if the UK government really is serious in investing in every part of the United Kingdom to provide connectivity across the Union, and I have no reason to say that they're not, given that the Prime Minister set up the Hendy Review, that when Hendy makes his final recommendations in the summer, this will be a big moment to see whether the UK government is going to do more, as Jane Bryan said, than simply talk the talk, but put the investment into making sure that the people of South Wales are served by UK investment in the way that both Burns and the Hendy Review have now set out.
Diolch i'r Prif Weinidog. Y cynnig nesaf felly yw'r cynnig o dan reol sefydlog 9.1 i gytuno ag argymhelliad